Well, all right. So I guess we are live now. Hey, everybody. This is Chris Shelton, and I am joined by Apostate Alex Barnes-Ross. And we are live streaming on both of our channels right now. And the idea here today is that we are looking back at the last year and what a year it's been, Alex, that Alex has actually appeared publicly on my show for the first time. And of course, has, it started his own channel and has been, going gangbusters. And of course, recently organized and led the largest Scientology protest in the last 15 years in the UK. And that is 100% awesome. So, Alex, let's do a live stream. Let's chat about the last year. I guess obviously I would start with how you doing?
Yeah. Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me back. I think wild, what a year. So yeah, as you mentioned, for those of you watching, I first spoke. So to give a bit of context, when I first started processing my Scientology experience, right, Chris was the first person that I met, that I got in touch with. And I spoke to Chris and I was like, hey, I've never spoken to an ex-Scientologist before, and I think I'd benefit from speaking to someone else who's been through the same experience. And so we had an hour-long chat, and it was really good to talk about what happened to me and what my journey was like. And then we spoke a week later when I had some more specific questions. And then a couple of weeks after that, we did a video together. And that was the first time I'd ever spoken about my experience at length from beginning to end to anybody ever before, let alone publicly. And it was a huge moment. And it's almost exactly a year ago. It was November 2022. And so I'm looking forward to this, like talking about what's happened in that year, not just in terms of what I've done on my channel and stuff, but like what's gone on in my mind and my recovery process. Because the way I think now about Scientology and about my experience and all of that is very different to what it was back then. And it would be nice to kind of just reflect on those changes and what's gone on and where I was at then and where I'm at now. Yeah, fascinating. And also thank you for giving me that platform and helping me do that in the first place.
Absolutely, of course, it's my pleasure, and in fact, my honor. I really am honored to have this work and be able to do what I do and be able to do it for a living. And you are you have been inspirational. You really have, right? Because you've been so, well, I guess the Scientology expression, right? You're so gung-ho, right? So like,
yeah,
you're very energetic, and it's awesome because in so many ways it reminds me of when I first got out and how get up and go and like, we got to do this. And it's a real, man on a mission kind of thing. And I totally get it. I so get it. And I was so glad you reached out to me and that we could talk and that I could be of some assistance. And then we could publicly get you out there and that all. Yeah, it doesn't see. It's so funny because it feels like to me that it was so much longer than a year ago, and because so much has happened in this last year, right? And it's a really great thing, and I really want to talk to you about the recovery aspects of it because a year is still baby steps. And I'm very interested and curious about hearing about your, the psychological milestones you've hit over this time. And it's funny because, I'm 10 years out, and from, in hindsight being, what it is and all that, I kind of hardly remember my first year in some ways, except for this blur of energy, and a lot of anger, which was sort of being redirected into, trying to do some positive stuff with that anger rather than just go on camera and rant and rave, because that wasn't going to help anybody. So anyway, all that screed aside, I remember after a year thinking, well, I should be fully recovered by now. And how silly of an idea that was after, which hit me 2 years out. So I'm curious, a year out for you, or at least not a year out, but a year of acknowledgement and working and starting to do the work and all of that, right? Yeah. Where do you see yourself right now compared to where you were a year ago, Scientologically?
Yeah, it's fascinating because you got to remember, I never intended to start a channel and start speaking out and doing what I'm doing. Like, that's not when I first shared my story on your channel a year ago. It was very much, I want to tell my story, and maybe some people can benefit or be helped by hearing a UK voice, a class 5 staff, city level org staff member voice. And that was kind of it, and helpful for me in the recovery process to just, tell someone and get it out there. And over the last year, that has changed to now becoming like, this is my life, right? So Scientology was my entire life when I was in it. I was working full time. I was going out book selling. I was studying. Like, it consumed every element of my life. And now it's very much doing the same thing again, but in a totally different way, because it's not consuming my life in that I'm practicing Scientology, in that I'm enthused and empowered and passionate about helping people get out of Scientology and sharing people's experiences and giving people a platform to do that on YouTube and all that sort of stuff. And that's not ever what I set out to do when I first spoke to you at all. And so that journey's been fascinating, because can I paint a picture of like where I was at in my head a year ago when we first spoke? So
yeah.
When I first spoke to you and we did our first interview, like I said, first time I'd ever spoken about and shared my story, I was still like, I'd been out of Scientology for, I think, 6 years at that point, but I still wasn't out in my head, right? I had been out and went about my life, did my own thing, and I'd done a few extension courses over the years. And I suddenly realized that there was a reason I was thinking certain things and the way I was behaving and stuff. I was still being affected by Scientology. So I went down that rabbit hole of realizing that that's what it was. But I still wasn't in my head completely like, Scientology is a bad thing, I'm done, I'm out. Like, I would still get uncomfortable watching stuff about Scientology, listening to anti-Scientology stuff. Like, even though I wasn't a believer and a follower, it's so ingrained in my brain. And like, part of me was like, well, that was a big part of my life. And yeah, it was bad, but I was kind of not on the fence, but there were times where I was considering, do I go back? Was it really all that bad? Is it just me over exaggerating? Maybe time has passed and things have changed. And maybe, if I do this return program, I can get back in and have a good time again, because there were horrible times, but a lot of my time in Scientology was great. I, had good friends and we went out and did fun stuff, selling books. Like, there were really good parts in that period of time. So it's not like I was ever flip-flopping in terms of belief, but there wasn't a doubt in my mind, I think, of like, is this really as bad as it seems? And all this stuff that happened was abusive and horrible and negative, or is it just me exaggerating and thinking out the button, but maybe it wasn't that bad. So there was a doubt. And I think what this process has allowed me to do is like get rid of that doubt and go, no, this is what it is. This stuff did happen to me. It was damaging. This is what Scientology does. And the reason I wanted to share my story publicly was twofold. One, I think there weren't enough voices from other countries, specifically the UK, sharing stories. There's a handful of people that have done that over the years, but like, I wanted to kind of have a new kind of voice out there that's fairly recent, so that other people can go, hey, I recognize that. I thought that was similar to my story. And so I wanted to help people just by sharing my story, because I'd been helped by listening to other people sharing their stories. But mostly from a selfish perspective, I'm like, well, let's put it out there, because that firmly closes the door for me in my head, right? So that I can't go back, even if I wanted to. If there's ever a moment of doubt, I've spoken out now, so I can't go back. And that actually was really beneficial for me, because it's not that I was thinking I would, but it allowed me to close that door in my mind and go, right, I've done something now that when I do have doubt, like, I can't have doubt anymore because I can't go back. So now I can move on, right? And start thinking about what happened to me and processing it, rather than questioning myself and my beliefs and whether it was that bad. So there was a kind of selfish element in there as well. And I think that just then closed the door, but it opened another door, which is kind of where we're at now, of, helping people and doing the channel and all this sort of stuff. But I think, I don't know if you have any comments on that discussion wise, of where I was at in my brain of like, back and forth, doubting myself. Is it really that bad? And by being able to speak out, it's like, cool. That puts my mind to rest now. I'm not going back. And even if I have a moment of weakness or a moment where I think, do I go back? Should I get back in touch with them? I could just do an extension course. No, I'm not even going to think that now, because I can't, even if I wanted to. And that was like so relieving for me, I think.
Absolutely. It's liberating in a way and empowering in another way, right? I remember the parallel for me, because you and I had very different exit stories. And of course, we came from different backgrounds in Scientology, with me having come out of the Sea Org and you being a Class 5 staff member in London, right? And of course, different countries, different situations. The PAC base in LA is a rather intense place compared to, other Scientology locations, maybe outside of Clearwater, where Scientology and the Sea Org attitude and KSW and, nose to the grindstone. And, you could imagine, you could imagine in PAC overboards, and you could imagine somebody being forced to push a peanut down a deck, right? Down a floor. I would never imagine they would be doing something like that in the London org necessarily. And yet that's just the surface level stuff, of course, because the core of Scientology is universally awful, no matter what level you're at, even if you're a public person. And so I see parallels, but I also see these differences, which I wanted to kind of highlight for a moment, because we look for the similarities between us. But I think these differences are important too, in highlighting how our recovery is a little bit different for each person. Everybody's got their own demons to face. And yet maybe we can categorize certain milestones. And what you just described, I think, is one of the most important ones, the one where you really realize you have crossed a point of no return. And that's a really important one, because statistics show that, at least in one study that was done, I believe this is a little high of a percentage, but it's a study, and it showed 75% of former cult members across the boards tend to go back to their cult, or find as a new one, right? They cult hop. And that's a lot. That's 3 out of 4 people. And the reason for that, of course, is everything you were just so, wonderfully describing, of the doubts and the emotional problems and the, and I'm not sure. And I think that's why that's such an important point, because it really cuts off that possibility.
Yeah. And the cognitive dissonance as well, right? So in Scientology, it gets drilled into you that if it's done correctly, it will work 100% of the time.
That's
so
right.
Even when I'd been out for many years and wasn't applying Scientology per se, I wasn't believing it, I wasn't following it, whenever I had like a moment in my life where I was down, or, whatever was happening, and I was like, I was thinking about my Scientology experience, I would be like, well, maybe it's not Scientology that was bad. Maybe actually it was that it wasn't done right. And maybe actually in my case, that if I go back, we could have a chance to do it right. And then I could see the real benefits. And then I kind of go, Alex, don't be stupid. Like, actually look at the reality of what happened to you and being locked in a room and all this sort of stuff. Like, and all these other stories. No, it is bad. It's not that it's not been done correctly. And I think those were all things that were going on in my head. I want to really clarify, it's not that I was thinking I would go back or wanted to. It was very much just moments of doubt in my head of like, maybe it was bad for me because it wasn't done properly, rather than the thing itself being harmful, right? By closing that door and saying I've spoken out now, that allowed me to really start looking at what happened to me, rather than questioning whether it was the thing itself or whether it was not being applied correctly, because there's no doubt in my head now. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. In fact, it makes so much sense, because correct me if I'm wrong, and this also, Jeff, PTS for Life, also discussed how, you can get out and stay quiet, stay home, not even under the radar. You're out, you're done. It's not even though you're under the radar. In your mind, you're done, but you don't do anything further. read any books. You don't get any education. You don't think about it even really too much. You're just like, right? And then a year or 2 or 3, somebody like me calls you, right? Somebody like me when I was in the Sea Org, right? Somebody comes knocking on your door. Gonna do a recovery. We're gonna get you back. And they can get you back at that point. Even if you think you're all the way out, they can drag you back in, right? Which is why this point that you're describing is so important, because it's an acknowledged point in your mind. You're never going back. There's no possibility you're going back. That door is closed. And it can be, until you take that step. Well, let me ask you, because I've seen others with this, and I experienced it myself, and I've always thought that it was itself such a scary step to take, because there's such a definitive, it's a black and white step. It's in your mind, it's a yes, no. It's a I'm done. And when you take that step and no more, right? I think there's a little bit of trepidation, a little bit of like, because it closes that door so thoroughly. And well, I don't know. Tell me what you're thinking about what I'm saying right now.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It took several months of watching your videos, watching other people's videos, reading up on it, before I was ready in my mind to think, maybe I should speak to someone who's been through this as well. Because there's also these, as I say, I wasn't a Scientologist last year, but there was still, like, it was ingrained in me, and there were still parts of Scientology thinking in my brain, in my thought processes. So like, you're taught as a Scientologist that anti-Scientologists, SPs, they have a covert hostility, have a dagger behind their back. They just want to harm and hurt you. And, anyone that speaks negatively about Scientology is just over dramatizing, over exaggerating. And, they've just got an axe to grind. And actually, they're probably the cause of whatever upset they had. And so I wasn't fully believing of that a year ago, but there was still some like reservation in my mind of like, maybe, I was questioning if I was to reach out to you or someone else assigned, there's a doubt in my mind of like, well, the church does say that this is who they are, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but it takes a lot to get to the place where you're like, I'm going to be okay speaking to this person, but I'm still reserved of like, what if they might just be out to get me, and they might try and, do something. So that's where my mind was at. And obviously I don't think that now. And you did a great job of talking to me and helping me through that process of talking about my experience and all of this. And it was really helpful. And just that process was difficult, because it's like recognizing that it might be beneficial to speak to a former Scientologist is a huge step. Then reaching out to someone is another huge step, because you're told that these people are the enemy of humanity and they're horrible and they're devils. And, like, reaching out is a big step to take. And then speaking to you was huge, because it's like, wow, in that moment of time, I realized that all of that rubbish is completely gone and proven to be false, because you didn't try and convince me of anything, change my thinking. You were just there to listen and answer my questions and say, yeah, I get it, I understand, because I've been through the same thing. And so by the end of that first call, it was like my mind was blown, right? And I don't think I was ready for that. I thought it would be helpful to share my experience with someone, but as soon as that call was over, I like bawled in like tears of joy, because it was like, wow, I've just told everything to someone who's been through it himself. And it was just that release, right? And I likened it in my mind to like an auditing session win. When you come out of an auditing session and it's like a weight lifted off your shoulders, amazing, you're walking around town like, buzzing. It was the first time I'd felt that since I was in an auditing session. And firstly, I'd forgotten that that's what it feels like. And secondly, like, wow, that just shows how much is still held up inside of me, that I
Right.
can have that insane, huge emotional reaction. And from then on, I was like, okay, there's more work here. It's not like I can just tell my story and then move on, which I think perhaps is what I was thinking when I first reached out. No,
Right.
it opened up this world of stuff that I need to start working on, that I didn't even realize was there. And that's the journey I've been on over the last year and will continue to be on,
Yeah.
because it's all packed up and tightly packed inside of you, and it's kind of like opening that can of worms that I totally didn't expect it.
Right. Right. I get it. And that's such a great, that was great. That was a great way of breaking all that down. Thank you. And of course, I'm very happy to hear all of that because I didn't know all of that. So thank you. But yeah, having somebody to talk to is super, super important. And believe me, I understand the trepidation and fright connected with it because of all the fear induction from Scientology. You know, they make you paranoid about us SPs, right? My first person reaching out my first year was Mike Rinder, you know, by email, and we didn't do, you know, Zoom conversations or anything, but just typing the email. I can still remember, right? It's like, am I doing the right thing right now? You know, and you know, and he answered, and it was wonderful. And that was the first actual ex I talked to, right? And I couldn't believe, of all the people, it was Mike Rinder, right? But I could
Yeah.
reach him through his blog.
And thinking
And
also, like, you know, in the
Mhm.
back of your head, thinking in that Zoom call at the beginning, I'm going to take everything you say with a pinch of salt, because I'm thinking like, well, I get that you're a good person and you're helping people and you're listening to me, but there's also this reservation in my mind of, you know, you're covertly hostile and you might just try and change my thinking or convince me of something. So everything you said in that first call, I was in my head being like, you know, okay, does he really mean that? Is that really, you know, don't know. And just like thinking, questioning it and thinking about it. And then by the end of the call, it's like, no, look, this guy isn't trying to convince me of anything or turn me into something I'm not or change my
Right.
thinking or my opinion. He was just listening to me and telling me his stories that were similar. And that again just blew it out of the water for me. It's like, cool. All of that rubbish that Scientology say about ex and anti-Scientologists is complete rubbish, because that's firsthand evidence I've had of that not being the case. And
Perfect.
then I think also so we spoke the first time, and then a couple of days later I was thinking about it, of like, okay, processing what we talked about. And then we spoke a week later or 2 weeks later, and I came at you and said, I've got a bunch more questions. Do you have another hour or two for it? And I think and this is a sign of that development and growth over the year. The type of questions I ask now about my recovery, about people's experiences, is entirely different to back then. Because back then, I was still trying to figure out what happened to me and make sense of it all. So that second call we had was just really specific Scientology policy questions, because
Right.
I wanted to understand from someone who was experienced and knows the policy, like, this is what happened, you know, well, what policy wasn't applied correctly here? What wasn't done there? What did they do here? What's the reason behind, to understand in a Scientology way what happened? And because at that time, it was really important to me to understand not just this is my story and this is what happened, but what was everyone thinking that led up to that? Like, what is the policy? What wasn't done right? Because I still felt some sort of injustice against the group of like,
Right.
Scientology was meant to do this and it didn't. And so therefore, per policy, what went wrong? And that now is completely not important to me, because I don't give any value or credit to what Scientology say about me, or I don't care what they think about me. But back then I did. And that was a whole nother thing. I don't know what your thoughts were on that.
No, I have a lot actually. Yeah, because I think again we're talking about these milestone moments, right? And they're not always obvious when they happen, but in retrospect, like we're talking about today, right? They become, oh yeah, that was when that happened. And that, what you just described, is such a vital, important part, which is why I talk about it all the time. is you got to get that education to figure out what happened to you. The education is not education for education's sake. It's figuring out what happened to you, and everybody's different. Everybody's got their own experience. And you as a staff member at London, right, you had your level of experience, and then interaction with the Sea Org, and the whole flag thing, and and all of that, and the book selling, and those were your experiences with it. And the idea that somehow it's right, you see, because I think when we first get out, we're still in a mindset, or can be in a mindset, of betrayal, right? Of like, what the hell? But also such confusion, because this isn't how it's supposed to go. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I entered into this thing, and I was going to go clear. I was going to go T. I was going to do this. I was going to save the world. We were going to make the place, everything was going to be better. And suddenly I'm at the receiving end of the Spanish Inquisition. What the hell is this, right? Yeah. And you don't understand. It throws you so hard, so fast. And sometimes it can happen so fast, as it did with you, where there was that thing with your mom and the event, and you couldn't go, or she couldn't go, and then it was just so bizarre, and it didn't make any sense. And I think those confusions are what hang us up in our leaving. We realize we need to get away, but we're not quite sure exactly why yet, and you got to sort that out. Because if you don't, as you described, right, you leave yourself vulnerable to getting recovered, to getting picked back up.
Yeah.
And getting back in, right? Because you kind of want to, because you're still thinking there's all this good potential in it.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was at a year ago, was confusion. I'd been out and I'd done my own thing and got on with my life, but didn't really ever start exploring what happened to me. Right. And it was still very confusing. And so what I wanted to do is better understand what happened to me from a Scientology perspective, because part of me was like realizing, or coming to realize, that Scientology had a bad effect on me. It was harmful, and they did these horrible things. I was locked in a room and all of this. I knew that was bad, but I don't think I was ready or willing to accept that yet, because there was still an element of me of like, hold on, what the hell has gone on here? Because I was told it would be this, and I thought it would be this, and then this didn't happen. So I was trying to understand again, and this is why I joined Scientology, because I wanted to understand whether it's really as bad as what people say, or whether it's not, and it's just misunderstood. And so I was in that position again of like, is it because of Scientology that I had this bad experience, or is it because it's actually bad again? And so there's that confusion of trying to figure out by policy what happened, what should have happened, what didn't happen, and break it down in my head. And what you have to realize, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, is how all-consuming the Scientology mindset is, right?
Yes.
When I was in Scientology, I signed my Sea Org contract, right, which is a 1 billion year commitment. Obviously not a legal contract that will never stand up in court, but it shows my state of mind. I genuinely believed and thought with every inch of my body and soul that this was the best way and the only way to help humankind. And this was the best thing for me to do, not just in this lifetime, but in eternity, dedicating all of my future lives to this thing. I was fully indoctrinated. I was completely consumed in my thinking of, this is the way to help people. This is my calling in life. This is my purpose, right?
Yes.
And so it's a long way to come to not have that anymore. Right. And that's all part of it. It's like when you start thinking, what happened to me? I'm speaking to someone else who's a former Scientologist. I don't believe in Scientology anymore, but that's what I mean about how deep it goes in your mind, because like that's where I was at. So there's every element of me, my thinking and everything that was being questioned, because I thought this was everything to me. And so there's trying to understand it. And then over the course of the next year, which has just gone by, now figuring out what my new purpose is and whether I even need a purpose and like all of that stuff, which we can talk about in a second. But that's the process that happened before we started speaking. Was like the last time I spoke about Scientology, I was the Scientologist. you know?
Exactly. It's how was I just thinking about this? Well, I was just going to reinforce this point about the education, right? But also that purpose point, because this, of course, feeds right into emotional needs, my favorite topic, right? In that, that's, I think that's the, that's how they get you. That's how they recruit you. But those needs are also sort of, if you can imagine, like, I don't know, I guess it's kind of like, it's how they keep you, basically, I guess. It's how they retain you. It's not just how they get you, but it's how they keep you there, right? They keep, I kind of got this idea of like Gulliver and the rope, holding you down, right? And you think it's so strong because it's all based on your prison of belief. And changing that belief set is the challenge. It's the hard part, because you really are being held down with threads. But it's, I guess it's a good analogy, actually, now that I think about it. But that prison of belief is so powerful, and you were just kind of describing exactly what yours consisted of.
Yeah.
Because not everybody follows along with, the saving the world mantra. There are people getting to Scientology for very different reasons than that. But you and I have that in common. Other people, it was much more personal to them for some other reason, or it was familial, it was this, it was that. But the hooks are still just as strong, I think, and how they get you, and then how they keep you. Because they keep you on this idea that they're going to solve, or you're going to be enabled to solve this problem, right? And you're just glued to this thing because you want that problem solved.
Yeah, I think
there's a point. Let me ask you this, because I'm not sure. I think you've hit this point, which is why I'm going to bring it up. But I'm wondering, it took me a while to get to a point of not just hearing or understanding or voicing the idea. It was designed to entrap me, but actually getting it. Right? Because I think that moment is also another powerful moment along the way, because it's, for me, I think that's the point. Somehow, when you realize it was bad, it was abusive, it was this, it was that, but when you can get past that point of, but it was supposed to be good, it was supposed to be right, it was supposed to save my life, it was supposed to save the world. When you get, I think the thing that gets you past that point is when you realize it was all a deception, that it was all designed to make you think that, but that's not what it was ever actually really all about. How has that manifested for you in the last year?
I think a really good example of this, and this links to like how deep it goes in your brain, because a lot of people watching this won't be ex-Scientologists or have never had a Scientology experience. So what I'm trying to do is explain it in a way that people can really understand, like, how difficult this journey is and how deep it goes. Because when you are fully consumed by this thing and you fully think that this is your everything, it's not like, everyone's different, but for me, it's not like I could just switch off. Okay, cool. Well, I'm over that now, move on. Like, because it's everything. So you doubt and question everything about yourself and your thinking, so even though I'd talked to you and realized certain things and whatever, like, I still was uncomfortable using the word cult, for example.
Right.
I would never call Scientology a cult, because although a year ago or the few months afterwards was like, okay, cool, I've recognized that it's done these horrible things to me, I recognize the things it's done to other people, there was something in me that just still wasn't okay with using that word, right? And I didn't know why. And that's just an example of like how deep it goes, because it's like, look, even though I've thrown the beliefs out the door, cult's a bit steep, I don't know if I'd go that far. I agree that it's a coercive group, and I agree that it's harmful and all the things that define the word cult, but that particular word I'm not going to use, because, like, again, it's drilled into you that the word cult is used by these certain people and it means this thing and it's an attack. And I wasn't ready to attack the church. I was just ready to accept what had happened to me. And I think that's that's an example of like that journey of like, no, well, now it was only maybe a month ago, 2-3 weeks maybe, that I first called Scientology a cult on my channel, right? It's taken that long. It's
Wow.
not because I didn't think Scientology was a cult, but I wasn't ready to use that word
Right.
publicly to describe it because of all the stuff, that the doubt you have in your mind, like, well, does it really mean this? And also, like, Scientology say that they're not a cult, and they'll use that against anyone that speaks out, because one of the things they say is SPs just call us a cult and therefore they're this sort of person. And I'm like, well, maybe by not using that word, people
Right.
can, maybe current Scientologists or other people recovering can like maybe relate to me a little better, because I'm not attacking the church, because you're told that all ex-Scientologists or former Scientologists are speaking out or attacking the church. So by not calling it a cult, maybe I'll resonate with some people in a different way. And I'm still very careful with my speaking the way I talk about Scientology in many ways, because I do want to resonate to people that are currently in. But like, I think my mindset has shifted from, when I first spoke to you, it was November. I started my channel in March. And when I first started my channel, I was very much like, I wanted to speak to current Scientologists, people under
Right.
the radar. And in
Yep.
order to do that, I want to be really balanced and fair and not attack Scientology and say, look, yeah, these bad things have happened, but these things are good. And there are good parts. And let's talk about that fairly, because some people were benefited by introductory courses and stuff. And I don't want people to come to my channel and think, he's just attacking Scientology. That's not what I wanted to do. And now, a year later, I'm like organizing a protest against Scientology and like wearing a shirt that says United Against Scientology with a fist on it. Like, that journey is huge. And I think the first part of that is speaking out, sharing my story
Yeah.
in November, to then starting a channel, I think is a good next like chapter bookmark, because
That's what I
that's a
wanted to
whole
ask you
thing as
about
well.
next. Exactly.
Mm.
What was the exact thought process for you between those two things? Because I got real curious about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I was watching more channels, more videos. For example, another example, Xenu, right? I was speaking to my therapist about that. I still find this hilarious. When I was in Scientology, I got confronted with the Xenu story daily, right? I was in Div 6, I was selling books, and people would, you're in a cult, you believe in Xenu, and I was always denying it and such. And so I never like fully believed the Xenu story thing, because I never got to OT3. But there was an element in my mind a year ago where, because you're taught in Scientology that if you receive this information before you're ready, you'll get pneumonia and die, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a year ago, it's not like I believed that I would die if I'd read or heard the Xenu story, but it's just made me a bit uncomfortable for some reason, somehow.
Right.
And so my therapist said to me after my video with you, was like, next time you hear or see the Xenu story, because what I would do, I would be watching a channel and then someone would talk about Xenu. I would skip it because I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I've heard it before. I know the story. I don't need to hear it again. I'll just skip it. Right. And my therapist just said, next time you hear the Xenu story come up, don't go looking for it, but just next time, watch it, listen to it. And then afterwards, just ask yourself how that was, how it made you feel. And so I did, and then I was like, "Oh, I don't feel anyway." This is like, wow, okay, well, didn't make me feel any different or whatever. And then suddenly I'm okay with hearing the Xenu story and using that word and stuff. Like, I think that's an example. I didn't believe that I would be harmed in any way by hearing it, but I was uncomfortable for some reason. And once I challenged myself on it, it then completely opened up a little portion of my mind.
Yep.
So all of that was going on between speaking to you and starting my channel. And then I realized in like February or March or something, it was like, look, there are so many people that are in this community and live chats that have been helped by watching videos. And I wanted to start a channel that like gave people a platform to share their stories but most importantly, showing that the stuff that happens in Scientology doesn't just happen in the Sea Org or in the United States. This stuff happens at every level of the organization in every city that there is a Church of Scientology, because I didn't think that there was really a point, like much of that point made online. And so I thought by starting a YouTube channel just talking about my experiences in London, it will show people, no, look, you don't have to be in the Sea Org in America to be harmed by Scientology. You know, you just have to be a Scientologist because the
That's
thing
right.
itself is harmful. So when I started the channel, it was like, I'm going to do this because I want to show people that you can recover from Scientology. You can do this without having to attack it, without having to be a big bad SP, kind of wanting to prove to current Scientologists that, you know, you can talk about your experience and not be an SP. You can have debate, and telling people that, like, showing people that this is a wider problem and it goes deeper in your brain. That was why I started the channel, to show that there's a UK voice. And now, a year later, as much as there are very much channels and there are very much videos and things I do geared towards current people under the radar and so on, the purpose of my channel is now very different. It's now very much like talking about experiences and not being afraid to attack it or call it a cult, and saying, hey, this is going on. This is someone's experience in Canada, you know, in France, in Germany. I'm exposing the financial crimes, and I'm now on more of a mission to take the church down. Whereas back then I was just wanting to talk about what I'd been through, you know?
Right. No, the focus has become clearer, you could say, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and we find that as we go. It's, you know, I never imagined, and I mean, I never imagined that this is what I would end up doing when I first got out, you know, and much less that I'd be doing it for years and years and actually, you know, make a living doing it and then expand and go, you know, on from there. This was not the life path I had envisioned for myself. Even leaving Scientology, this wasn't it. So it really does develop in interesting ways as you move forward with it, you know?
Yeah.
Huh. So, okay. So that's what prompted or got you started with the channel, and where the channel has kind of gone. And in terms of you personally now, do you still, I mean, are you feeling, you know, more focused? Or does it still feel a little like, oh my God, there's so many avenues, and I'm, you know, and I want to do so many different things. It's a little hard to choose. Or what's it like for you in terms of that?
I think what the conversation I had with you a year ago really helped me to do, and this last year, is better understand what happened to me and what was done and my experience. And I think the more I understand, the clearer it is in my head. And so therefore the easier it is to kind of recover from it. So, like, you know, I was rewatching the video we did a year ago the other week, and I was watching it going, look, I didn't lie or say anything wrong in that video, but the way I talk about my experience now, if we were to re-record that video in exactly the same way with the same questions, I would talk about it in a very, very different way. Because back
Right.
then I was recalling stuff and recounting from my memory, but now I understand what happened way better. I'm a lot clearer in the way I talk about it because it's clearer in my head.
Right.
And so that's a really positive thing. But also it does open up the can of worms, and it's like, well, now I understand this. Well, what about this? And what about, and it gives you more questions to ask. And
Yeah.
it's a journey. I was very much in a rush at the beginning to, like, okay, go and see my therapist. Okay, I want to do this and get it done. And, like, what's the plan? And now being like, no, this is going to take time. That's okay. You know, there's no rush. And being okay with being uncomfortable or not knowing something. Because in Scientology, it's all about knowingness, right? You've
That's
got to
right.
know.
That's
And so
right.
being okay now with, like, well, I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know what I think about that. That's okay. I still have to challenge myself on that on a regular basis because it's so ingrained. And that's the thing where I'm like, cool, this is showing the process and the progress and the journey, I suppose, of, like, I think sometimes I have to remind myself to focus on my own recovery as well sometimes, because I get so carried away with, like, you know, helping other people and speaking to people on my channel and, like, take on the mission of the protest. It is quite I have to remind myself to like, well, hold on, I haven't done any mind like personal work myself for a couple of weeks or whatever. Maybe I should think about this. So like with the protest just gone, you know, it was the other day that I was like, well, hold on, I've been on full on protest mode for weeks and weeks, and now it's a week after the event. I haven't actually sat down and questioned how I feel about all of that and processed what just happened. So I have to remind myself to do that. It's not kind of automatic all the time.
Right.
I can't remember if I've even answered your question.
No,
Sorry.
you're fine. No, it's totally
ramble.
fine. No, that's what I was looking for, because you're right, because it can be a little dispersing, right? And and here's the awful part, and I say this, and it's kind of joking, but it's actually totally true. It's just difficult. At least it was difficult for me to hear that all of the things that have happened, all the change you've experienced, I don't want to say it's just the beginning, because it devalues it to say just the beginning. So instead, I will say these kinds of changes will continue.
Yeah.
And I will just put it that way, right? Because and you can't tell, you don't know where it's going to go, but it's always a better, more understanding, more clarifying place with each new thing you learn and each new experience you have moving forward, letting go of different aspects of the past or dealing with various stresses and traumas of it. So it's unpredictable in that sense too, you know, and that's the journey that it is. It's an adventure. And I wish that people would think about it that way, because there's so much self-discovery in the process of the recovery from a cult. If I believe it's done the way it, you know, that I think it's most effective, with the education and the therapy and the you know, the kind of talking about it and getting yourself out there and letting go of the Scientology think. You know, how much do you still find yourself thinking in terms of Scientology language or concepts at this point?
That's a really good question. I think a good way of answering that is like to try and explain to people what I mean about the thinking process and how Scientology affects that, right? So, for example, I've told this story before of like I was having a kind of disagreement with a friend once a year or so ago, and he was upset or angry, and you know, we were kind of not an argument, but whatever. And I realized in the moment that instead of listening to his concerns and empathizing and whatever, I wasn't listening to anything he was saying, because I was like, well, this guy's at this, you know, angry and upset, so he's not thinking rationally. So I need to move him. I wasn't thinking I need to move him up on the tone scale, because I wasn't thinking and believing in Scientology in that way. But I instinctively was like, we're not going to resolve this while he's feeling this emotion. So let's try and get him to feel a different emotion so that he's thinking rationally, and then we can talk about it and find a resolution. So in answer to your question, I wasn't applying Scientology or believing in it or thinking, but I was doing a Scientology technique without realizing it, right? And that's what I mean about how deep it goes. And I didn't even realize that I was doing that because of Scientology. Right. So the more I go down this journey, the more little things I realize I do, my behaviors, thought patterns, I'm finding more and more things every day where I'm like, maybe that's because of Scientology, or maybe that's because of this, because of this, because of this. Maybe that's actually me. Maybe that's what I think, or maybe, you know, so there's lots of little things. So there are always things that I find myself doing. I don't think in Scientologies with the language. I do use it probably the same amount as I did when I was in Scientology, but that's because I'm speaking to so many former Scientologists and it just comes out, right? But I'm not sat here going like, oh God, there's so much dev tea with this email, right? Like, no, I don't think like that. But I might, you know, find it hard sometimes to, you know, do something or think about something because I'm like, oh, why am I angry at this? Well, I'm angry because I have a sense of urgency. Why do I have a sense of urgency? Because I feel like everything has to be done now. And why do I think that? Well, because we've got to clear the planet. And what I'm doing here is not clearing the planet. And so therefore there's no urgency and it can take time. And therefore I don't have to be angry about this. That's what I mean about
Yep.
how I'm thinking now, right? I
Yep.
think also, like, look at the journey I've gone on. The more I understand about this whole process and how it affected me, the more it like inspired me or encouraged me to help others and speak out. So
Mhm.
when I started my channel, it was very much sharing my stories. And now I'm like on a mission to do that with my life, because I now better understand how this stuff really works and how it really does badly affect people and hurt people and destroy families and lives. And so the more I educate myself, the more it fuels that fire inside of me to do something about it, rather than just kind of, do my own recovery. And everyone is different. I'm not saying everyone has to do that and everyone goes on that. It's not, that's not what I'm saying. But for me, the more recovery I do, the more fuel I have in my fire to like stand up against this thing and say like, no, this cannot continue. And if I have any sort of small platform or ability to do something like my YouTube channel, then I feel like I have to, right? It's a burning sense of, like justice, I suppose, of like, no, I've got an opportunity here and I'm going to take it. And so I never in a million years, a year ago, would have thought that I would think like that. A year ago, I just wanted to speak about my experience and let other people do the same. It was never my mission. And now my whole life is geared towards this fight. And that's a whole change that happened in the year, only because I've been asking questions and trying to recover. And that's how it worked for me.
Beautiful. Well, I totally get that. I want to ask you about something. There's an idea that's been formulating recently with me about leaving cults and recovery and whatnot. And it borders on this insult that people use. And it occurred to me that this concept or this thought has really only been used in a kind of derogatory way. So I've kind of avoided even wording it this way. But I want to throw it out at you and see what you think about this. Kind of alluded to it earlier a little bit. When you first leave a cult, if you don't do something to change how you're thinking, feeling, or looking at the world through the lens that you were looking at it through when you were in the cult, if you don't do something to change that, then there really isn't any reason to think that you would be changing how you think and look and act towards things. In other words, you can take the person out of the cult, but the cult is still in them.
Yeah.
And this is routinely used, especially on social media, as an insult. Oh, I disagree with something you're saying. You're being extreme. You're being stupid. You're being this. You're being that. Well, you can take the person out of the cult, but can't take the cult out of the person, right? And it's actually a kind of a truth, not in that particular context. That's just some, internet insult bullshit. But the fact is that if you come out and you do nothing, how are you any different? Right? The only real difference in your life is all the social pressures have now changed. So the social conditioning will be different if you have changed your social network, right? But everything up here is still tuned into how L. Ron Hubbard or, Jim Jones or whoever taught you to think. And so it occurs to me that it's not even really something that maybe I've sort of been thinking about, the post-cult education thing is sort of a optional kind of thing. Well, if you want to, you should read some books, or if you want to. And over the years, my view on this has changed, where I now feel like if you're not doing that work, you're not getting past it. A year out for you, what do you think about everything I just said?
I agree. I think that everybody is different. And so there is no uniform, you have to do this and you have to do this and then you'll be recovered.
Not a set program, but something.
Yes. Yeah. And I think for me, I was out for many years before I even realized it was still having an impact on me. And that's what one of those things to add to that fire that's fueling me to speak out and help people, because it's like, I didn't realize with that instance with my friend that I was applying Scientology. I was out for years. I hadn't thought about it. I didn't think it was Scientology. It was just something I was doing instinctively. And when I connected those dots and realized I'm doing it because of Scientology, even though I hadn't set foot in an org for several years, that's when I was like, holy cow, this thing is really deeply ingrained in my brain. And I think, look, some people can leave and go about their daily business and not think about it anymore, and that's absolutely fine. You know, for a lot of people, it's very traumatic. And so to have to use a Scientology term, to have the confront, to like look at what happened and kind of realize that and start talking and thinking about this trauma in your life is a big deal. And for some people, they're just not ready to do that, and that's fine. Because you might just want to put a stop to it and go, that was a traumatic experience in my life, I'm moving on, not never thinking about it again. Great, fine, you do that. But for me, it was like, once I realized that I was still behaving in a way that was affected by my time in Scientology, I'm like, well, this is what I want people to know, is that Scientology is harmful in its practices, in the way it treats people, and all of these horrible abuse and harassment stories we've heard. But it's innately harmful to everybody that comes in contact with it, because it alters your way of thinking. And that is the long-term damage every single Scientologist will have, whether or not they've been locked in a room or whatever. I'm using that because that's my example. Like, even if that hadn't have happened, I would still have had that instance where I'm applying Scientology without realizing it. The thing itself, the practice of Scientology, alters the way you think if you're in it for how many years, or when you're young and vulnerable, whatever. And that's the harm, because you can't just leave and change the way you think, because you don't even realize that your thinking has changed. That's what takes time.
That's you got it. Perfect. Thank you for saying all of that. We've had some questions coming along the way, and I'm thinking that it might be a good time to start picking up on those, because there's some pretty good ones in here, and I've been wanting to ask you about them. Let me get my mouse. There it is. Okay, good. Now I can't bring these up on the screen from my end.
Are we going in order of the start?
Yeah, but I'm just going to go in order here from the top. There's a question here from Mena. I'm very interested to know just how long you were in and what made you write to the psychopath elf when you had seen the panorama about how psycho he is. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I joined Scientology 2010. I officially was kicked. I was declared a potential trouble source 2014, but I still practiced and continued Scientology, doing extension courses and calling myself a Scientologist till about 2016. So all in about 6 years. But you can draw the line in different places. You know, I was on staff, and then I was off staff, and then on staff, kicked out, rejoined. So overall, my experience is about 6 years. Why I wrote to Dave Miscavige, we talked about previously. So I was the new bookseller, or director of public book sales in the church in London. And you're taught the book sales is the number one most important thing to do in Scientology, because it gets new people in. So I was like, well, you know, I should speak to the most important person in the business then, in the company, and say, hey, I'm the new guy in London. You know, I want to help because I'm the new bookseller. And so wrote him a telex and said, hey, just letting you know, I'm the new person. I was applying what's called a non-E formula, non-existence, which we can do a whole nother video on. But essentially, I was trying to just, you know, do the right thing. And in a way, it kind of worked, because Rachel Hastings, the person who works at or used to work at Gold Nero Productions as a film person, spoke out recently. I was doing a video call with her where we crossed paths at London, and we hadn't even realized, because she was told, like, by David Miscavige to go to London to film this hotshot new bookseller, because we're smashing it, how great we are at selling books, and we're doing really good at the birthday game and all that. So she was sent to London to film me and everyone doing the Div 6 book sale stuff, because we were doing so well at it. And I remember that day, and we reminisced on it, and it was hilarious to think, wow, I remember a conversation that we had now. But that's how gung-ho I was, and how, like, you know, why I wanted to write Dave Miscavige, because I'm like, I'm doing great things here. Like, you know, hi, let me know what I can do to help. And then obviously the next time David Miscavige hears my name is when he's shouting at Janet Laveau down the phone because I'm causing this giant flap of a protest outside St. Hill last week.
Exactly. Yeah. Unbelievable. Unbelievable, that one. Well, now, okay, so what about this one here? Could you do a little summary of why you think they disconnected from you in the first place? Like, weren't you a top performer as you were just going over? Was someone just jealous? I think it was a little bit more than jealousy.
Yeah, I think again, this is a whole video in and of itself, but I was kicked out because I was complaining that Scientology wasn't working on me. I went into a session, I was upset, and I was like, I want Scientology to work. It's not working on me. And it was misinterpreted. And then basically they said, you're telling people that Scientology doesn't work and therefore you're a potential trouble source. That's essentially why I was declared a PTS type D in the first place. They didn't necessarily disconnect from me, but I was still doing extension courses and stuff. But yeah, I was a top performer, and as per policy, I should have had ethics protection, and I shouldn't have been allowed to have for that to have happened. But then again, it's all rubbish. It doesn't mean anything, exactly. You know.
I mean, because that's the thing is one of the things. Well, let's just comment on this real fast, just because you just made me think of it, and it's worth commenting on. Is that one of the things about cults that's so infuriating? And this is one to another, to another, to another. This is a principle that you will find true across the boards with cults. Is the leadership or the senior people always break the rules. Always break the rules. Right? There's a certain level of people who cannot ever break the rules, and then there are people who can always break the rules. And somehow that is allowed to continue, I guess you could say, right? Somehow we cognitive dissonance our way through that, right? In lots of different ways, we justify or rationalize that. But that's one of the key things in waking up, is realizing that's happening all the time around you all the time, and it's not okay. You know, because you've been justifying it, and rationalizing it as to why it is okay this whole time, until finally somebody does something that you just go, wait a minute, this is just not right. You know, it's one of those wake up moments. But but because we expect continuity, we expect you know, that the rules are uniformity. We expect uniformity of these rules, and you come to learn, nope. That's not part of it. That's not part of this picture. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Catherine, that does mean you've known him for a year.
Hey, Catherine. Love Catherine. She's great. Yes, a year. Yeah. And I think what we said earlier about like how it doesn't feel like a year. I completely agree with that, because, you know, it feels like I've been doing YouTube and all of this forever. And when I think about it, it's like, well, no, I started my channel 8 months ago. I started my recovery from Scientology a year ago. I'm in this for the long haul, and I've kind of committed in my mind to doing this as a thing with my life now, which I never thought I would. But I'm at the very early stages, I'm at the very beginning. Yeah, I've been out for a few years, but it's almost like I left a year ago, because I didn't do any of that thinking process, recovery stuff for 6 years. So it's almost like I walked out of the church for the last time a year ago. And so, yeah, it's just been a really interesting journey. And like the experience of the protest, for example, like massively in the last week, I've realized was a huge thing to change my thinking and help me in that recovery, right?
Yeah, tell me, please. Let's go into that.
Yeah. So, like I said, when I first spoke to you a year ago, I didn't ever think I would ever be doing something like organize a protest. It wasn't important to me. What was important to me was kind of figuring out in my head what went on and what happened, so that I can make sense of it and move on, and that's it. And the more I learned, the more I understood, the more I was empowered to do something about it, like I explained earlier. And so the IES event thing was announced, and it was like not even a question in my mind, I'm going to do a protest. As soon as I read it, I was like, well, that can't be allowed to happen. And that's a huge change in the year of like, if I heard about the IS event last year, I probably would have been like, oh, okay, cool, whatever. Whereas now it's like the IS event is happening. Well, of course, I'm going to be out there with signs and a megaphone, right? That's a huge change. And then on the day over the weekend, we spoke about this on the podcast the other day with Jeff when he was here. It's like, it's the first time I'd come face to face with my abusers, right? With Scientology. And in the last week, I've done a lot of thinking on that, of like, you know, again, it just fuels me more to want to do something about this. And it surprised me how much joy I got in the planning of the protest, at
Hmm.
knowing what a flap this is and how it's annoying some certain people in the church. And like, I found it's quite funny because I was organizing the protest and my thinking going in was like, I don't care about how Scientology think about me or whatever. I just want to voice my concerns. But when I was doing little things here and there, you know, talking to the council about the premises license and knowing that someone in OSA is having a, like, you know, they're going to be a bit annoyed at me. I'm causing a few little problems for them right now. And I didn't realize I would find a little bit of joy in that, which I definitely did. And I was like, this is funny. I'm actually kind of enjoying this because I know that I'm creating a little bit of a problem for them. And in a way, it's kind of like they've created a lot of problems for me. And this is a little way of like kind of getting a bit of satisfaction. That's my axe to grind. I'm not attacking them, but I'm like a bit of like, okay, cool. I'm like, I'm making their life difficult now. And I got more enjoyment from that than I expected. But the biggest thing was, you know, that journey of the last time I was on David Miscavige's radar, it was because I was the #1 bookseller in the UK, and now I'm on his radar again as the #1 SP in the UK. It just like it's changed my thinking a lot. In that, like, no, I'm deciding that Scientology can take over my life and my thinking now. Again, it's done that before. But now I'm the one in control of it, and it's not taking over my mind, my thinking, my life because I'm a believer or a follower. It's doing that because I'm choosing to do something about Scientology here in the UK, and I can't live with myself if I don't do something about this. And I helped a lot of people get into Scientology, and now I want to help people get out. And I think that a message of compassion and all of this that we've talked about before with the protest is the start of that journey. And so in the last year, I've done this recovery thing and I'm going to continue doing that. But I'm now in a place again where I feel like I'm just at the start. Even though I'm a year in, I'm like, who knows where this is going to go? Because a year ago, I never would have thought I would be organizing a protest. And now here I am. What am I going to think next year? Like, what am I going to think 10 years from now? And the more I hear about Scientology, the more I'm like, this cannot go on. It's a, you know, it's a human trafficking cult. And I never would have said those words a year ago.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. Now, am I talking too loud? There's a comment here about I just
turn
have
my
to
mic
stop
up.
listening. Doesn't Chris realize? I think it's because he streams with Tony, who is also loud. Am I talking too loud?
I just turned my microphone up. Is that better for everyone?
Okay.
Sometimes my mic, I mean, you're fine for me, but that doesn't mean it was fine on the stream.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering too, because
Okay.
I'm hearing you fine,
Well,
and but I don't hear myself here. And if I'm coming across too loud,
I think you're fine. I just turned my microphone up, so hopefully that helps.
okay. Well,
There we go.
sorry guys, I didn't realize, and thank you for letting me know. I'll try to tone it down. I'm a little
No, you're
excitable. I
fine,
know I
Chris.
have a deep
You're great.
voice, so sorry
I
about
think
that. I definitely
talking
did
of
not
that,
mean to
actually,
drive people off. Okay, well,
one of the things that's actually relevant to one of the things I wanted to talk about was when we had our when we did our first interview a year ago. You had such a good way of like guiding me through that process and asking
mhm,
me questions that allowed me to think about it in my head and not feel like attacked or under pressure. Or, you know, I was watching it back and I was like, look, there are moments of trauma and pain. I'm talking about these and I've never done that before. And I think you just had such a good skill of listening to what I'm saying and asking questions that got me to answer them in a way that made sense, but also like guiding the conversation in a direction that touched on something traumatic or bad or whatever, and then moving on to another topic that was, you know, kind of lighter, and then moving it back again. I just wanted to give you a bit of shout out for that because you did that so expertly, and I didn't realize until I rewatched it the other week, because I didn't realize at the time what was traumatic. I didn't realize what was going to be upsetting or whatever. And now I do. I'm watching it back and I'm like, you knew like how I was thinking back then, and I didn't. And you did a great job of that.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I wish I was as consciously clever as I would like to be, but thank you for that. I'm rolling it as I go, and I'm glad that the results are as good as they are. That's what makes me happiest about all of this. So
Yeah.
thank you for saying that.
You
I'm trying
helped
to
me
keep my
explain.
voice modulated a little
No,
bit here right
you're
now
good.
too.
I've turned my mic up. There's some comments saying it's a lot better now. But
Okay, good. Okay.
I think the key thing is you helped me explain the why and the how, right? Which
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about. Like before, I was thinking about the what, what happened to me? When did this happen? This happened. What does that mean? And over the last year, now I'm now thinking of, okay, well, because back then I was like, why has that happened? How has that happened? And now I've got a better understanding of it all. I can explain it a lot better to other people. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting
I
change.
totally get it, and thank you.
Mm.
Thank you very much for saying that. It's it's a lot of work. It's been a long time. I've been a lot of education trying to figure this stuff out and find the whys for myself. And now I'm really looking forward to hearing from other people, talking with Jeff yesterday, talking with you today, talking, and I'm sure we'll talk again in the future and with others about their recovery, their process, their ways of going about this, so that I can have a wider range of experience with this. You know what I mean? Because I know that there isn't just one way to do this. We have to find our own answers, and the way we're going to go about doing that is going to be different for each of us in some ways, even if we find common um, ground in things like Sagan's demon haunted world, or Lifton's thought reform and the psychology of totalism, or these various works. Even though we're all reading them, we're coming away with different things from them, from our experience. And I just want to encourage that to keep going in this community as much as possible across the boards. That's all I want.
I think a sense of, sorry, no, go on.
No,
Were you
no,
going to move
please.
on?
What were you going to say?
Okay. I was going to say a sense of like community and belonging is so important, especially for me with my recovery, because what I was saying earlier about Scientology being everything to me and everything I believed in and everything I was doing in my life. And, that was my purpose. I didn't realize at the time a year ago, but what I needed was a sense of community and purpose again, because
Yeah.
the last time I felt truly inspired to do something, or like a feeling of meaningfulness in my life, like the last time I was like, this is who I am, right, was in Scientology. And I didn't realize that a year ago. And now I'm in a place here where I'm like, there's this SPTV community, there's all these X's that are helping each other, and there's a sense of purpose. We're all trying to do the same thing, expose Scientology and take it down and share experiences and so on. Like, I feel like I found that sense of belonging and purpose that I hadn't felt since I was in Scientology.
Yes.
And I didn't even realize I needed it, right? And it's not like some grand sense of we're going to save the planet. It's very much like, no, look, we all have shared trauma and shared experiences, and we all are trying to do the same thing. And that just feels great, because for the first time since I was in Scientology, I'm like, well, now I have a little bit of a clue about what I'm doing with my life now. Like, I've got a bit of purpose. I've got a mission that I'm on, and it doesn't have to be all consuming like Scientology was, where that was the only mission I'm working on. Now it's like, well, it's important to me. It's something that I'm doing, and I'm spending all day, every day doing it, and I'm okay with that. But I'm the one in control of what is taking over my life now, and I wasn't before. And right now, I'm okay with this being the number one mission that I'm on, and we'll see how that changes over time. But like,
Right.
that sense of belonging, of like, no, I have found a group of people here who understand me because we've done the same thing, that we've all been through the same thing. I found a community of people here who, you know, all want to do the same thing that I want to do, and we're all supportive of each other. And I
Yes.
don't think I have felt that in years, and I didn't realize that that was a huge part of myself that was missing. And it just feels really nice to now be in a place, okay, I can relax now in some ways because I know that that community is there. So I don't have to look for it. So I can rely on that sense of like, okay, cool. I don't have to worry about what my purpose is in life, because right now this is my purpose, and it might change, and who knows, and that's okay. That will come to me, but I don't have to spend mental energy trying to find that. So let's look at what I'm going to do about that, and how does that manifest itself. And I think that's a huge change in my mind, in my thinking.
Well, I wanna underline a couple things you said, because they align so much with what I've been talking about for a few years now, in regards to those emotional needs, right? Because, and the reason I say this is because purpose and intent, or goals in life, is an emotional need, but so is community. And community actually is one of the big ones. They're all big in their own way, but community is like, it's one that a lot of people gravitate towards and really need. It's not an emotional want; these are needs. You can't just go live alone. And community is so important to us that that's one of the reasons, unfulfilled, that people will go back to their cult, and why people go back to Scientology, because at least those were people who understood me, and you were just giving voice to it, right? That is what community is. It's the people who understand you, and that's what we want. We need that in our lives, and I think lacking that, or lacking even knowing that, we can skip it, think it's not important, have some other idea why maybe I shouldn't focus on my emotional needs in my life, and lose out, suffer as a result, because of that ignorance, that lack of knowledge of what it is we're trying to do in our life. And fulfilling our emotional needs is the thing we're trying to do. So, obviously there's other things we do too, but everything centers around that. If it's not emotionally satisfying to you, odds are you're not really going to enjoy it or want to do it.
Yeah.
Right. So, so that's where these things come from. And you just described that. So I wanted to kind of underline it a little bit, because there are psychological principles there that are important ones in this whole process.
I think
so. Thank you for putting it that way.
Yeah, thank you. I think that emotional journey as well is one that's important to talk about, because we did a live stream the other day with Jeff where I cried, or tried to stop myself from crying 3 times, right? And I get emotional now about Scientology stuff, which has never happened before, right? A year after speaking out. Like, that community links it, because when I hear stories of Liz Ferris and her dad, Bob Ferris, and the way kids are raised in Scientology and how it tears families apart, and I know these people personally now. A year ago, I've heard stories and stuff, and I was like, yeah, that sounds really horrible, and I obviously don't support that in any way, and I want to put a stop to those things. But now it emotionally impacts me when I hear someone else's trauma, because I understand it better, and I understand what happened to me, and and I'm now starting to understand the impacts that trauma has had on me, which I didn't know a year ago. I can slightly better understand how that affects someone else who's had a different experience, that maybe was, hurt in a different way, or whatever, like forced abortions, all this sort of stuff that I will never truly understand, because I haven't had that experience myself. But I feel like I now understand a little bit more about how that might emotionally affect someone, because I'm like, I now feel a part of this community. I feel like it's a part of me. So when I hear someone's story of this happened to them, I'm like, it upsets me, because I'm like, that's really horrible. And if this little thing that happened to me upsets me this much, I can only imagine how much that must upset you, which is a really bigger thing that's happened. And so, things like being locked, I was locked in a room and told I couldn't leave until I'd done my OW write up, written up what I'd done wrong against the church. I never considered that a traumatic experience, right? I was like, yeah, that happened. It was bad, whatever. And it's only now that I'm starting to think about it and go, yeah, that's not an okay thing to do to a teenager, is lock them in a room. And I was crying and hysterical, and I was upset. And, I've only recently started unpacking that in my head and going, no, that was trauma. and what effect has that had on me in my life, and realizing how it affects me and where I feel uncomfortable in certain situations, and going down that journey. But like that emotional process of like, now I know what happened better and how it affects me. Like my emotions are coming out, and I get upset and I cry when thinking about the horrible things that people have gone through, and I was a part of that, and it's upsetting. But it just fuels me to be like, this is why it's so important to me to stop it, because I'm now feeling all these emotions that have been suppressed for 6 years or more, right?
Yes,
And
that's
I
right.
hadn't. I remember the first time I cried like properly, I was at a gig 6 months ago or something, and they were playing an emotional song and I was crying, and then I realized I was crying, and then I was crying happy tears because I was like, oh my god, I'm feeling an emotion. Like, I was happy that I was able to feel an emotion of sadness that I hadn't felt like properly or thought about or processed in my head. And so it's all of these emotions to be suppressed and now coming out. And it's a wild journey, but it's freeing and liberating, I suppose.
Big time. Yeah, big time it is. Well, let's take a look at a couple more comments here, because we've
Yes.
been getting some. By the way, I want to thank everybody. This one here, Blue Blooded and everybody. I think somebody gifted a membership as well. Thanks for the support, guys. We really do appreciate it, because what we're doing is fan funded, and your support is what allows us to keep doing the work we are doing, and that's as a realist a statement as I know how to make about it. So thank you for all of your support during the show
Yeah,
here.
absolutely. And like PTS for life here. So, Jeff, don't forget to tickle that like button.
That's
Like
right.
all of that support, that engagement helps our channel and helps our video reach more people. Like when I say to
Right.
people, like, subscribe, comment, it's not because I want, people, my videos to have lots of views and engagement and stuff. No, it's because the YouTube algorithm pushes videos out to more people if they get lots of engagement. So if you engage with a video, give it a like and a comment, YouTube thinks that's good content and shows more people. And the whole point is that therefore it reaches more people and can potentially help more people, right?
That's right.
I want my videos to get lots of views because I want Scientologists to watch them, and I want people affected by Scientology and cults and stuff to watch them and hopefully be helped by them. Not because I want to have X amount of subscribers or views or whatever. It's because the more people that see it, the more likely someone is to see it that needs to hear it,
That's right. That's exactly right. Me too. Go Power Thetans.
Thank you, Mary Gabriel Summers.
Exactly. Now, here's a question I was definitely going to ask you, right? Have
Yeah.
the PIs started following you yet? And somebody else also asked, I think, in the same vein, right? What kind of fair gaming are you experiencing now?
Yeah. Great question. And, a lot since the protest, right? There was an instance before the protest where a private investigator was following me for a day, and I didn't mention it or talk about it publicly because I didn't want to give all my cards away, and like I didn't want them to know what I know and all of this sort of stuff. But definitely have had private investigators following me a little bit before the protest, but since then, Jeff and I, have both definitely seen things happening. And now Jeff's gone back to Canada. I'm just keeping an eye out and I'm just kind of seeing. I don't think they're full on following me all day, every day, everything that I do. I think an element of that is Bonnie Woods had a case here in the UK. She's an ex-Scientologist, and she sued the Church of Scientology for harassment because the PIs were following her and they were saying stuff about her, and she won that case.
Oh, did
Scientology,
she?
yeah, this was maybe 20 years ago or so. Scientology had to pay her money and apologize and admit to harassing her. So I think Scientology in the UK are a lot more reserved anyway because they've already messed up and been called out for it before. So I've always said and always thought that they're maybe not going to be as fully heavy-handed here as they were, as they are in America, because they can't get away with it. They've already been told off. And so they're a little bit nervous of doing it here. And I think that rings true when you look at how they've been handling me. They haven't been following me all day, every day, but they have been sending PIs after me every couple of days, or, for a couple of hours every day or whatever, in a way that it's a bit more guerrilla, I suppose, so that I can't claim I'm being followed and harassed all the time, but they're keeping tabs on me. So there are times when I've seen them follow me and times I haven't, and I'm very aware when it's going on. But I think they are just a little bit scared because they've already been told off for it. But yeah,
Interesting.
fair
Well,
game's definitely happening. They've been trying to hack into my website as well and all that sort
yeah,
of
well,
stuff.
yeah.
And Twitter, there are loads of Twitter trolls telling me I'm a clout chasing goblin, and there are statements they put out in the press about how I'm an anti-religious bigot that's part of a hate group. And I'm like, look, the more of this stuff you do, it just gives me content.
I know, right? I mean, in that sense, it's true. I'm going to publicly say, and I know you and I have talked about this stuff, but I'm just going to say for the public's general benefit here and how fair gaming works, because it's not necessarily, I don't know that everybody realizes that there's two modes of it. There's two ways that OSA operates. They operate covertly and they operate overtly. And so the covert operations are the ones you don't see or hear about or know about by design. And when they hire people, back channel people to come in and troll you or attack you or do things to you, it's the kind of thing you can't really prove as Scientology, right? And so it's a more covert effort at intimidation and wearing a person down. It's exhausting because they carry it on and on and on and on and on and on. As well as the overt stuff that we see. So I want people to know that what Scientology does is not always in the sunlight or out in the open where you can see it. That's an intimidation factor they engage in. They certainly are heavy-handed with Mike and Leah. They have been with Tony. They are being with you now, in that you can see what they're doing. That's a choice they make. And I want to just let everybody know that even if that overt stuff disappears, it doesn't mean they're not doing stuff.
And also,
and it's now a point where for all of us, it's not paranoia when it's real, right? When it's outside.
So. This is the start as well. The policy is attack, 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 never defend. Yep. And so I'm almost surprised at in some ways, the attack hasn't started. When you consider what I did with the protest and all of the stuff I'm working on, like you said it the other day in a stream that I'm probably #1 target in the UK for Scientology right now. And that's probably true. But I haven't seen the attack yet that I would expect from that status. And I can only imagine that that's just them formulating a battle plan. And also the long-term thing. I very publicly stated this wasn't a one-off thing. I did a protest. Now I'm going to go about my life. I'm at the start. I'm on war footing and I'm not messing around, right? This is going to be the next 20, 30, 40 years of my life. And so when I've so publicly said that, I think also they play the long game. They're probably just working out what they're going to do because they know that coming after me and harassing me on the streets every day is they're not going to get away with that for very long. And that's not going to stop me speaking out. They're going to have to think a bit smarter about ways to intimidate me into silence. So definitely they have to been doing stuff. Yes. But I'm almost kind of waiting for it still. And it will be interesting to see what they do. But it's a necessary evil. It's part of speaking out and doing what I'm doing. You just have to accept that that's what they're going to do, and that's fine. Whatever, it's worth it, and it's necessary to expose their evil crimes and abuses and the way that they treat people and disconnect families and tear families apart and destroy lives. That's, if I have to take a little bit of shit from Scientology, so what? It's worth it.
Well, it might. We'll see. We'll see what they decide to do.
Next year, I might be like, I'm never speaking about Scientology again.
Oh God, no!
Who knows?
God, I don't mean to imply that, but I want us to be going in with our eyes open, right? Have you heard? And this is also for public consumption. Let me just educate the public out here. We haven't talked about this hardly ever. There's a thing called an estimation or an estimate. Have you ever heard of those? That OSA does.
An estimate, what, in terms of the threat analysis? How much of a threat I am?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
actually a program. It's where they draw their programs from. We've seen on other channels, people have talked about the OSA programs that are drawn up. Those programs for individuals. There was one on Tori, there was one on Karen De La Carriere, there's one on Jeffrey Augustine, Tony Ortega. Every critic has one. Guaranteed, every critic has one. Now, how far they're along they are in their program, how well they are at executing it, how many resources they can invest in it, that's what changes. But the fact that these programs exist is a fact. Those programs are based on an earlier analysis and investigation of the person, which is called an estimation. And that's an OSA tech. There's a whole thing that OSA has on how to do that. It's similar to, but not the same as, when they do what they call their data evaluations. They do evals or org evals or something, estimate, evaluate a situation to find why it's happening. With OSA, it's called an estimate or an estimation. And that's probably what they're still mid right now. They probably had one on you or were forming one on you. And then the protest happened. It was like, oh shit, this guy's a much bigger threat than we had estimated. Now we have to re-estimate the situation. And part of that is going to be a searching analysis of all the information they can find about you, public and private, in order to find your likes and dislikes and your hates and fears and your loves. What do you love? What do you hate? What do you like? What do you dislike? What do you fear? Right? And those things from those lists is where they draw up their program. It's an incredibly custom made harassment program.
What an honor.
Yeah, that's the whole process of what goes on at OSA. And then that program is assigned to somebody to execute, right? And that's the OSA dirty ops stuff. So it's not random. It's not just, throw things at people just because we want to, do that. It's a calculated activity. And I want people to appreciate that so they understand what we are up against. The Dirty Tricks Bureau is an organized activity. The good news for us these days, and the thing that makes it so different now from how it used to be, is the number of people they have to do it. The number of resources they have to do that is significantly less than it used to be. And the law is more aware, and the public and the media are more aware than they were back in the days when they were really engaging in the Paulette Cooper level, let's get this person to commit suicide kind of stuff. They still want to do that kind of thing, but they're tempered by the public awareness of it. So that's what we're up against in a nutshell.
Yeah, exactly. And you said it really perfectly on a stream the other day. You were talking about, you're kind of encouraging people to offer support in the community, as a community, for people, for me and whoever else is going through it. And I think that's so important, of like that sense of community we talked about. Like, we're here together, united. And I have had so many messages of support and phone calls and FaceTimes and stuff with, yourself, Mike Rinder, Amy Scobie, all of these like long-term, big, well-known SPs that have been fighting the church for, in some cases, decades, offering their support and advice and being there for me. And I can pick up the phone at any time of day and call any of these people if I need to. And that's been really moving for me. First, I didn't expect it, but secondly, like, I really feel that sense of community of like, we're here together and we're going to help each other if that's needed. And that's what I mean about that sense of belonging and community, is like, we will do anything for each other because we're trauma bonded, right? And a year ago, I never would have even I would have never admitted that I had trauma about Scientology. And now here I am talking about how great it is that we're bonded over the trauma. Like,
I know.
Weird.
Progress, man. Absolutely. It's wonderful. Okay, let's take a look at some more of these comments here, because as we go down the line. So yeah, the door's never closed, Alex.
I'm pretty sure they've closed that door pretty firmly for me. And if they haven't, I've bloody welded it shut. There's nothing about me that wants to go back or has any appeal whatsoever with it. There are still points of time where I'm thinking about something and I'm questioning it. And I'm like, was that really as bad as I think it is?
Yeah.
but not because I'm like believing in Scientology, but I'm like, has that just been dramatized in my brain, or was it actually as bad? And
Right.
there's that level of doubt sometimes, but there's never an element of like, oh, maybe that therefore means it wasn't all bad and I should go back. You know what I mean? Like overall,
Yes.
negative experience, negative thing, something that needs to be stopped, something that's harmful to people. A year ago, I never would have said Scientology was harmful. Now I'm actively encouraging people to stay away and advertising the fact that it's harmful to everybody, not just staff members or SEAL members. It is a harmful thing. The thing itself is harmful, not just
Correct.
stuff people do in Scientology.
Exactly. Exactly. In fact, let's be crystal clear. And not that you're not, but let me really put this down. Like I'm going to say this really clearly. Every single person who has ever had an auditing session in Scientology has been psychologically abused. Period.
Yeah.
Whether they acknowledge it, whether they choose to believe that or not, whether they remember that experience as an abusive experience or not, psychologically they were abused. That's my take on it.
And a year ago, I didn't even realize that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's people who come out who still swear by the auditing, right? Because I felt so good. And I'm always like, well, you can feel good eating a Twinkie. It doesn't mean it's good for you. And I'm not even being facetious. I'm being serious. Our perception of something and the reality of something can be at odds. And that's what auditing does. By design, it fools you and deceives you. And even after you leave Scientology, again, if you don't learn about that, you can walk away thinking, well, I was helped by the auditing. I think there's a longer conversation to be had there.
I mean,
okay. What else?
There has to be, just
Oh.
very quickly before we move on to the next one,
Yeah.
like there has to be benefits, right? Like I look at my experience, like I remember having a great time with people going out book selling. It was fun. I did enjoy parts of it. Like there were benefits, and I think that's important to note, because there has to be stuff like that. Otherwise, people wouldn't join in the first place. But overall, it's harmful, and I think it takes a lot to realize, firstly, to differentiate between the good and the bad. That's really hard. I did a big whole exercise of trying to establish what's me and what's Scientology me. What do I believe in versus what do I think I believe in because of Scientology? And that's a whole journey I've gone on. And I'm in a place now where I'm like, I still don't know who I am, like in many ways, but that's okay, because I'm figuring that out and I'm learning it. All this stuff you go through as a teenager, like most people go through this teenage rebellious phase and like, figuring out who you are and like what your desires and meaning is in life and all of that. That kind of developmental progress stopped for me when I joined Scientology. And now, at the age of 28, I'm going through that journey in a very different way. But it's interesting, and it's like I'm okay with not knowing who I am in many senses, because I'm figuring it out, I'm finding out, and I'm enjoying that process. But I do know that this is what's important to me, and this isn't important to me, and this is what I do believe in, and I don't know how I feel about that. And exploring those things is where I'm at. And a year ago, I didn't even realize I had to do that work. So it's not always easy, but it's what I say. I'm at the start of that process, and I'm only a year in.
It's so awesome. I love watching your journey here. I really do. It's just I don't want to come across like, oh, it's so cute, because I don't mean it that way at all. I don't mean it that way at all. I mean, it's not this, oh, it's so cute. It's just it reminds me so much of all the the milestones I went through too. And I'm just so looking forward to the growth that you're going to have as you continue forward with this and learn more about how all this stuff works as well, and all of that, as I'm continuing to do. It's not like I'm at some plateau, I mean, it's not like that. It's a continuing journey for the rest of your life.
Life is a journey. Clearwater Claire said it just there.
Yeah, there you go.
Well said. All right, next one.
All right, what else we got here now? Alex, we're so glad you aren't doubting anymore, because we love having you in our future, in our lives.
Thank you. And I love having you guys. Like I said, I didn't even realize I needed this community. Now I found it. I don't know what I'd do without it. I love this, and I love that I've been given the opportunity to spend my life doing this. I find so much fulfillment from this than anything I've ever done before. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, okay, so now we have a question. Did you ever find yourself selves thinking like a Scientologist? What's your answer on this one?
I think we kind of covered on this. We
Well,
covered this a little bit earlier, right? I think
yeah.
there are still moments in time where I'm like angry at something or annoyed, or I'm like, oh, that doesn't make sense, or why doesn't this person just do this, right? Because that's what makes sense in my head. Like, why don't they just do it this way? Because that's clearly the best way to handle the situation, clearly the most rational. And so times like that where I'm like, that's Scientology talking, because I was in the belief for many years that Scientology is the only and the most rational and the best way of handling stuff. And so therefore I know best, and my way of thinking is rational, and some non-Scientologist person's way of thinking is not rational. And so there are times now where I'm like, hold on. That's not the case. I don't think any differently or better or whatever than anybody else. We're all humans here. We all make mistakes. There's no one who's more rational than another. Well, I mean, there definitely are people that are irrational, but like, I mean,
I wouldn't quite judge to say that.
Yeah,
but
yeah, that sort of, yeah, I take that back. But what I mean is that, like, when sometimes I find myself getting annoyed or frustrated that someone else is doing something in a way that doesn't make sense to me.
Mhm.
And in that moment, I'm like, that's because of Scientology. And that's what I'm working on, to now try not be frustrated, but try to understand that someone else thinks it's rational. And why do they think that? Like, that's interesting. I wouldn't have done it that way. I want to understand. I want to, figure that out. And rather than being annoyed because I think I'm the most rational person, like, that's not what I think. But that's thinking like a Scientologist, right? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, no, I totally know what you mean. In fact, I'm going to relate to that myself here, because 10 years out, I am still having onion layer epiphanies about exactly what you were just talking about. It took, it took me a while to realize that there were emotional problems after coming out. It took me a while to realize there were ego problems after coming out. But even as those things start dawning on you, there are deeper and deeper and deeper levels of realization of how that's true. Maybe I should put it that way, right? As it comes, as you go deeper into, either counseling or education or introspection or analysis or whatever, as you put these things together for yourself. Certainly for me, as I've been putting these things together for myself, I have found, and relating them back to me, how ego has been a factor even prior to Scientology with me personally, specifically, and how Scientology appealed to that and then blew it up. Like, oh, you have you're a little self-centered, you're a little egotistical. Well, let me bring out the air pump, and really go to town on that ego of yours, right? And that's what we talk about even at the beginning when I was writing my first articles about how Scientology creates narcissists. Because it does, right? It does that activity of pumping up your ego, and it certainly did that for me. And you don't want to come out of a cult and go immediately into, well, I'm worthless and nothing. That's the exact opposite place you want to go. You want to come out and realize you are somebody and you are something, and you do have meaning and value, and you are a special person simply because you exist. And you want to foster that because the person's already deflated enough coming out, right? Or often can be. And so you don't want to immediately go attack their ego, right? And call them narcissists and all that. But those things can still linger. At least in me, they did. And it took, it's a continuing process. Let's put it that way. Rather than thinking about it as a yes/no binary, it's a continuing process of stripping that away to get to the place you're talking about, and realize that more and more in a healthy way in your own life, right? Being curious rather than being certain, being so sure that, your way is the only way. And how could somebody possibly think differently? Well, they're just wrong. Well, hang on. Maybe they have a valid point of view too. Like, just driving those kinds of demons from your mind can be difficult over, in a process. And Scientology, doing the exact opposite to you, and making all of that so much worse that coming out, it's that process.
But it's fun. Like, I'm enjoying that, because when I have moments like that, I'm recognizing that, which I never would have done before.
Right.
And I'm questioning, like, why is that? And then I'm challenging myself, and then therefore not doing it again next time. Like, my whole way of thinking has changed, which a year ago I hadn't. So now I recognize when I do something that I'm like, why am I frustrated? Well, because this is what I think. Well, why do I think that? Well, that it all stems back to Scientology. And that process is, even though that doesn't mean I'm not thinking like that in the first place, like, it's helped. I realize it now when I'm doing it, and therefore can figure it out and then stop doing it. And that's the start of the process of completely recovering and changing the way that you behave in a positive way. So I'm enjoying it, because I'm like, I don't have to be annoyed about this, because it's my thinking that's messed up here, rather than someone doing something wrong,
Totally. I know. I love it. It's such a journey of self-discovery. It really is. It's so awesome. And maybe us ex-cult members focus on it so much. I really want to encourage everybody, whether you're an ex-cult member or not, right? Do this work. It's fun. It's hard. It's a challenge, but it's just the things. Okay, thank you very much, Laura Waldy, for those memberships, by the way. I want to thank you personally for that. You're always so wonderful in supporting my channel that way.
Yeah, and while we're on that, just very briefly, if people want to support our channels, right, you have Patreon, I've got Buy Me a Coffee. There's links in the description. Like, if you want to support us, YouTube take 30% of super chat money. So the best way, if you wanted to financially support, is buy a coffee or join Patreon or whatever. Like, that helps us do what we're doing. But I always say the number one is engagement, like I said earlier, right? Liking, sharing, subscribing is the best way of helping us. But if you do want to support financially, buy Chris's book, go to his Patreon. And memberships and all that stuff.
That's right. That's exactly right. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Okay, and realizing you've been trained in the betrayal blindness is another level of betrayal. Sure enough. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and like I said, this is just the beginning of that recovery process. The sense of betrayal is something I've only started thinking about in the last month or two, right? It's not something that I've done a lot of work on over the last year, because I didn't realize that that was something I needed to work on. And betrayal is very much a part of it. It's really hard to trust anybody when you come out of Scientology, because you've believed with every fabric of your being that this is the right thing to do. And then that's all thrown away, and you're shunned and disconnected and all this stuff. Like, you trusted these people with your life, literally. So it's really hard to be able to trust people in any way, shape, or form when you leave Scientology. And obviously I've worked on that over the years, but now, a year into my recovery from Scientology, it's like, well, hold on, I was betrayed, right? Because that's what happened. And what impact has that had on my behavior? Like, why am I so guarded in some circumstances and so open in others? Why am I, suspicious sometimes? And why am I uncomfortable sometimes? And, why do I trust this person and not this person? A lot of the time, that's because of, different things that have triggered different emotions in me, or, they've said something or whatever that's re-stimulated, to use a Scientology term, something that happened when I was in Scientology, and therefore it's kind of triggered me and all. Like, that's that journey I'm on now with that particular topic. I was betrayed, and that level and depth of that betrayal is huge, because it was everything to me. It wasn't just something I believed in, something I did. Everything about me was Scientology. It was everything to me, and I lost that, and that's huge, and that's something I will continue working on.
Totally. You and me both, man. So, you want to answer this? There we go. Yeah. How long were you in? How long have you been out physically?
Yeah. So I was in, I think I mentioned this earlier, 6 years or so from beginning to end and then physically being out. I was gonna say I last stepped foot in a Church of Scientology in 2014, but that's not true because I last stepped foot in a Scientology church last week when I went to Sunderland Org and had a tour. Which is a whole nother thing. But I was kicked out of Scientology in 2014, but I still did extension courses and was talking to people and so on. I stopped considering myself a Scientologist in 2016, but that didn't mean I was still under their influence. I last spoke to a Scientologist in a kind of recovery cycle type way because I still had doubts and stuff last year, right? I was in text communication with someone a month before I first spoke to you this time last year, right? So there was still a part of me that was like, maybe I should go back. This is the right thing. I was still kind of a Scientologist in a little way a year ago.
There it is. And we talked about that earlier. That's right. Yeah. That, you can be gotten back. You got to change how you think, not just what you think after coming out of a cult. I just, man, if there was one thing I could get across to ex-members. Okay, this is a good one.
Super
trainee psych and therapist here. What have your evolving feelings been towards the therapists and mental health professionals since leaving Scientology?
Yeah, again, you're trained in Scientology to believe that psychiatry and mental health professionals are the devil and they're horrible and they're the worst people on the planet. And again, it took a lot of work before I was ready to accept that I needed to seek mental health support. And then even then, when I did go and see a therapist for the first time, it was a huge thing. And I was really skeptical from the get-go. I was open to my thinking being changed on that. But it was a huge step to accept in my head that I might benefit possibly from seeing a therapist, then to reaching out and speaking to a therapist, and then to go to therapy. Those are 3 huge steps in my mind that I went through. Yep. And continue to go through that process. But I'm a big believer that therapy is good, and everybody I think should go to therapy if they can, because you'll never know what things you don't know about yourself, and it's helpful, and I have no issue with mental health. I think mental health is really important. I think it's underfunded and underappreciated, and it's really super important for everybody. So yeah, complete U-turn in my thinking in the last year.
Awesome. It took me a little longer to get in front of a counselor or a therapist than my first year. You jumped in very well. I needed some time, and I sort of resolved my Scientology viewpoint of psychiatry early on in the first year about, hey, it's not the devil incarnate, it's not evil, and it must not be destroyed. It's not, and I kind of have maintained the same view about psychiatry ever since, which is that it's a flawed group of human beings, who are trying and have dedicated their professional lives to trying to help people who have very, very, sometimes very, very serious issues. And when you come into psychiatry, right, in clinical psychiatry, you're talking about people who have issues that are so deep that they can't even operate in society, function well. I mean, you're talking about some pretty damaged people for lots and lots of different reasons, which we are still figuring out. And as long as I look at it that way, which is, I think, an objectively accurate way to look at almost any science, if I'm being honest, then it makes a lot more sense. I don't have to put good, bad value judgments on this. I can just look at the fact that there's developing science, which is still a baby one. And so the help that I've received through psychological counseling and through psychiatric medications has been substantial and undeniable. And very, 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 very different from auditing. So different, in fact, that I used to say, well, auditing is Scientology counseling. And I'm loath to say that now, because there's so not anything in common with auditing and psychiatry or psychological counseling. They are such different beasts. And so that's been, that's how I've sort of been thinking about this stuff. People sort of expect me to sometimes apologize for or act as an apologist for psychiatry or something. And I'm not going to do that because I know that people do bad things and wrong things and abusive things in that field, just like they do in every field of human endeavor. I don't think the percentages are significantly higher in psychiatry of abusive behavior than they are in other spheres of human activity. So I'm not going to take on the apologist role. Yeah, bad things happen. When you're trying to deal with the very most difficult things that people can manifest in mental illness and behavior, it's rough. That's a rough job. So I give them a break. You know?
And it's getting away from that totalitarian thinking, that binary choices, right? You know,
Yeah.
in Scientology, all psychiatry is bad.
That's right.
And now it's like, well, no, look, people abuse the system and abuse drugs and all this, and like that is a thing that happens. But mostly, I think psychiatry helps people. There are times it gets it wrong and it doesn't help people and it harms people, but ultimately it's a good thing. But it's not a totalitarian belief. I'm not now all psychiatry is good, which is just the same as saying all psychiatry is bad. It's like,
That's
no,
right.
there are good bits and there are bad bits, and there's that nuance, right, in thinking.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank
John
you, John
Page.
Page.
Thank you for the super chat. Tea or coffee on me. Thank you. That's very kind of you.
That's right.
Mashmir Dokugal, a big contributor to the channel in the comments.
Oh, nice.
Thank you. He's they're really nice person. Feelings are awesome, even if they're complicated. Yeah.
Yep.
True.
I'll say feelings are not only awesome, feelings are what make life worth living. That's my take on them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
All right. Henny. It's one of my critics.
Awesome.
Being indoctrinated by bull baiting is totally denying and deadening feelings and emotions. Yes, that is true. It's so empowering and challenging to overcome such abuse. I'm very proud of you, Alex, to be able to cry, feel. Excellent. Thank you, Henny.
Thank you. Yeah, it's true. And that's what I mean about Scientology itself is harmful. It's not just the things people do in and because of Scientology. The actual thing itself is harmful. I never would have said that, 12 months ago. It's still mind-blowing to me that that's, what I'm saying, but it's cool.
Totally. I get it.
Yeah.
You have found a way to meet your real needs.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if I don't know what my real needs are sometimes, and that's fine. So
that's right.
Anti-Harju question, Alex, how do you nowadays think what's real now and what's not real? I mean, that's the big question, and one of the things I'm working on now is like trying to establish who I am and who I'm not. What do I believe in because of Scientology? What do I believe in because of me? And, I don't think I'm ever going to get to a place where I'm like, cool, black and white thinking, I know this is me now. Like, I think it's a journey, but like, feel like I've never done that before. And so what is real and what's not real is really hard because it's like, well, I believe this thing. Well, do I think that because that's me? Or do I think that because Scientology told me to do this and then this and then therefore I think this? I don't know. And that's the journey. So I feel like I kind of answered your question with a question, but there are some things I know more about myself now, and there are some things that I know I do or think or feel because of Scientology, and I haven't, figured out what the alternative is to that yet. But that's the journey we're on. I'm like recognizing I'm not 100% comfortable with this behavior that I have or thought pattern that I have. And I've recognized that's because of Scientology. The next step is, okay, well, what's me? How do I want to behave or think? There's not Scientology. And that's the bigger question. That's harder to do, but I'm enjoying it.
Big time. Awesome. I think I'll just summarily say, I've embraced agnosticism in terms of, supernatural things, right? I'm not going to say yes, no, maybe so. I'm going to say, I don't know. And that's the most honest thing I can say about all of that. As far as the rest of what's real or not, maybe we live in a simulation. Maybe, we're all a mote in God's eye. Maybe, nothing. Maybe whatever, right? What's real is what's in front of me and what I can see and feel and perceive. And that's what I run with. Summarily speaking.
Yeah.
Okay. And Heidi, yes. Here's my book. That's about as close up as I can get on it there. Scientology, A to Xenu.
I
An
thought I'd
insider's
make you
guide
full
to what,
screen for that.
okay, thank you. An insider's guide to what Scientology is really all about. You can get it on Amazon. And this is not my story. This is a critical breakdown of Scientology, right? So you're going to get the chapter 1 is enough about me and my story, so you get who I am and what it was all about. But this is a breakdown of the actual stuff. And that's why I like to push this out to people, because it's more than just an individual story. And so I hope you guys will check it out. You can also get it. I did an audiobook version on Amazon as well as a ebook version. So all available to you. All right. I think that's what we've got. We're coming up on the 2-hour mark, and I think we have had an awesome conversation today, Alex. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chris. I think this is great. I mean, overall, it's just been mad. In summary, it's been a mad year, right? Of like recovery, and I'm such a different person in so many ways now, but I'm also so much more myself than I was then. And I guess the takeaway I think the thing I want people to take away from this conversation is there's several. Number one is that Scientology is more harmful than you think to everybody just in its nature, which is a big learning that I learned that I've had over the last year.
Yes.
It goes deep in your brain and it reprograms in a way the way you process information. I didn't know that a year ago. I didn't know that when I was in Scientology. I was out of Scientology for years before I realized that. I want people to take that away and go, look, this is why it's harmful. Yes, the abuses, locking people in a room, forced abortions is horrible and that's bad. And I'm not in any way pushing that down or making any comment on that whatsoever. What I'm trying to say is that people who are in Scientology who haven't experienced those things are still hurt in a mental way. And that's something I don't think a lot of people realize. The second thing I want to say is that, again, massive credit and kudos to you, because if it wasn't for your consultations, I wouldn't have got started on this process and this journey. If it wasn't for your channel, I wouldn't have heard other people's stories and realized there are other people out there who've had similar experiences to me, and therefore I'm not alone, right? Because I didn't know that there were other people out there until I found your channel. So I want people to take that away and realize that that's why your channel and every SPTV channel is great. And that's why I'm doing it, because I'm like, the more voices there are, the more people realize they're not alone and the more that people can be helped. So that's important. And I think finally, I just wanted to, in a summary, just kind of put a shout out to everyone in this community, yourself included, of like, thank you for all of this support over the last year, because I didn't realize I needed support in some ways, and it came through and I was like, oh wow, that's exactly what I needed to hear, and I didn't even realize it. And this community of people want to help each other and support each other and be like, yeah, cool, go Alex with the protest, and buy me a coffee, and comments on the videos, and supporting everything, and like that is a really great atmosphere, and it fuels me, and I'm sure you and everybody else, to keep doing what we're doing. So I wanted to like thank everyone for that, and just look forward to the next year, because hopefully we can do this again in a year and see what's changed in the next year that comes. I think a lot of people don't realize that I'm only 28. I've only been out of Scientology in my head for a year. I started the recovery process a very short period of time ago. It feels like I've been doing this forever, but I'm only just getting started. I don't know what I'm doing most of the time. But I'm enjoying it. I'm looking forward to what happens next.
Excellent. It's wonderful, Alex. You're awesome, man.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess I will wrap this up by saying, obviously we've been talking about, consulting a lot during the show. I swear to you, I am not paying Alex to say these things. So far it's been really good, and it's been really fun helping people. I'm not a therapist. I'm not even pretending to apply therapy to people, but if you want some help, you can reach out to me through my website or through my channel. You can email me at askchrisshelton@gmail.com, and we can get in touch, and we can figure out, if you need some help, or if you have a family or friend who is in a coercive situation, you don't know what to do, you don't know how to talk to them or whatever, maybe I can help, right? So far, so good. So I'll put that out there for everybody as far as I go. So, all right. Thanks, guys. Your comments have been awesome, by the way, through this whole thing, and so supportive. So thank you very much for all of your views and support and help to all of us in what we're trying to do in this fight. It is a fight. I wish it wasn't. I wish that we didn't have to do this, but groups like Scientology exist, and they are predatory and they do hurt people. So we got to do something about that. So thanks for joining in this fight by watching us here. All right, Alex. And on that happy note, I guess we'll wrap up.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris.
Bye, guys.